Hello. Thank you for the awesome course so far. I wanted to make sure to say that. And also for the great articles. There's been some really, really good ones. So I appreciate that a lot. Um, so let me get into this. So I wanted to focus on an article from this week called Friday Night Tacos, Exploring Middle Eastern Borderlands Through Familial Women's Oral Histories by Falcon. Um, Wow, like what a cool article. And I love that it was like tied to people from New Mexico too that moved out somewhere else, which we saw a lot. I think is like kind of a social sorry, a historical norm here in New Mexico with like the Manito Trail and stuff like that too. Um, but wow, what a like really good article. I really very much enjoyed it. Um, I love to just give you a brief summary of the article. It's about um, the author and her familia, her three family members, including her mother, and I think it's her two aunts or tias. And she's describing how moving out to the Midwest, in Kansas in this case, um, detaching themselves from the what we typically think as home, right? Or our space, um, to another, but still making it home, in this example with food. And so tacos end up being kind of like the motif in this article. um and so one thing that I like explaining about here is how the author describes and utilizes the narratives from her familia to describe what it was like to be someone from that's considered an outsider, I guess you would say, into a new community that is not at all like their own from home, culturally, ethnically, um, even like if you I hate saying racially, but racially too. Um, but one thing that is cool about it is she collects those narratives and shares this story about how these women, um, although they were out of place geographically and had to move over there for work or whatever, um, they still made it home. And they even worked to kind of eliminate uh, that uh, that straight up distinction between this them and us by using food. And like I love that part about like the Friday night tacos. And I think about like Friday night like football games, like thinking like in rural communities and how important that is. And like I visualize it as like, man, like everybody hit up that lady's restaurant after, and um the author's family had tacos there and everybody enjoyed them, and that was like a connection that they made in that community to establish themselves as a part of the community, but then show people also what their culture is like, right? Or where they're from is like too. And so it's about finding that relation, that balance between like a place and identity, um and how those interactions or clashes, like she says in there, could be something productive too. Um, and so that to me was really, really cool. I really very much enjoyed like all the narratives. They were really good. It brought me um uh memories of my own. Like it really helped me connect with that too. I think was like she talks about that getting a fresh tortilla and then a hot dog in it, and even like peanut butter and jelly and fresh tortilla, like that was real stuff for me, growing up. And so like thinking that could happen somewhere else, like was something I never thought of, really. I don't think about, I guess I think about like like people that migrated somewhere else because of work and stuff like that, taking those traditions and taking just those simple things like a piece, like a snack, right? To somewhere else that keeps it like home, like keeps things norm in the norm. And so I very much enjoyed that. That was really, really cool. It gave me a lot of perspective, um, and also helped to just gauge things a little bit better, I think, in regard to relating to the article too. And so that I wanted to say, it was really good. I really much enjoyed it. But then she also talks about how it was also about them trying to like fit in a place where typically people that were like them were not seen, or was seen as something else. And what I mean by that is maybe just like workers and stuff like that, and like not real people. And so, and vice versa too. I think like that was like the concept too, was like even seeing the Midwestern Anglo people was like, wow, I've maybe seen them in the movies or something, but not the same as like actually being there, right? And then I love that they also like she also, or they also incorporated um the stories of them growing up in those communities too. The three women, like how it was about um them uh describing what it was like being a child there, going to school there in these kinds of communities and growing up like that, but also still having like the Mexicano roots and stuff like that too, at home, but having to go through those two different spaces. Um, and automatically it reminded me of a lot of like what we have been learning already in regard to like that what you kind of feminist approaches. And of course this is totally embedded in Anzaldúa, but um it's like does it in a really easy to understand and thoughtful way. And so tying that, I mean, like Mexicanos and our food, like we love it. Like we can't live without it. We have to take it everywhere with us. It doesn't matter like where we're at. I remember being different places and there people we'd bust out with our chilito or whatever, and limes, and that's like how we roll. And so to see it like in print is also like an amazing thing. But it's that idea of like those spaces, right? And I think that that approach was really magical because it took us, because we tend to think of the borderlands as just in one section, right? But the borderlands can move too, and that was one thing that I thought was great too about the article, is they really emphasized that idea that the borderlands isn't always just stagnant; it can go somewhere else, right? Um, and so that was really, really interesting as well. But there was a lot embedded within this too in regard to like some of the concepts and stuff that we're learning, and frameworks. um I think like some of the main ideas or points that they were trying to display in here was basically how women learn to navigate, um and do this like in communities like that, using food, like in the instance with the Friday night tacos, right? And how they end up having this sense of belonging and even fitting into communities, um based off of doing this in these what we quote unquote white spaces, um and help people understand um that Chicana feminist approaches could be like utilized to understand like what it is that occurs in these situations, right? um and so that was something that I thought was integral about the article, and like what it was, why it was important. But it was also important to like also understand that there's all these pieces of all these narratives that are shared here, um that are utilized in hope of being able to like understand how these cultures meet and how they can come together but still maintain um uh their significance, or their like individuals connection to their cultural heritage, even in spaces that are would be considered like white dominated spaces. And so how do they live in those areas, and how do they maintain, and also how they uh, uh adjust to those white and rural identities, if you will, and how they kind of understand the forms in which they are oppressed in those communities, and how to like navigate that within the community too. Um, And then the other thing too, I'm sorry, I'm like looking at my notes too. But also like understanding relationships too. Because I think that was a big part of it that I got out of it too, was like they like you would tend to think they would just like kind of maintain those relationships within the home or like the family, but they did branch out and they did um make friendships with people outside of there. And sometimes it would be like with another person that was similar to them, but there was also instances where they were like, no, like these people are part of our community now, and they incorporated them into their like Friday night tacos, right? So that was kind of an interesting thing too. um I think that there was a lot of really good evidence that supported those points, and a lot of it was like those descriptions and those narratives where they shared examples of even like having to address those issues as being a young person, but then also making their way into the community via tacos or whatever, right? And like I think it's kind of interesting to go that route. And I think it's easy because of food. Like I think we tend to like I said before, like really all of us can connect with that. And like now with like how American society has really like, I hate saying embraced, but yes, they've like incorporated that more into the um into society. And so like when you hear about Taco Tuesday, and like so that's like a thing. And so I have like my critiques about it too, and I'll share in a minute, but like I think that was another part of it that was um kind of interesting because it did it like the narratives are strong in this. And I like and like thinking about like ethnographies and even some of the stuff that we talked about before with like Delgado Bernal, where we see these pláticas and these testimonials, right? Like this is totally that. Like this is like that's why I love this one. Is I thought it was a perfect example of that. But the author places themselves in their, like we say, is like an ethnography, or ethnographic research. And this is my opinion because the way I read it, I came from that angle. I guess I was looking at it, because they put themselves as like an insider and outsider. So they're an insider because they're part of the family. That's their family. They live there. They've done all that stuff too. But they're also an outsider because they're one of the ones that first experienced it. Um, they're not the ones they're not the mom. They're not the tias, right? But they're still a part of that. And so they frame themselves in that context, if you will, as far as their positionality is concerned. But I think one thing that's really cool about it is that the narratives speak for themselves. And so there's a lot of really good stuff there in regard to like even establishing like I love there's a part where they're talking about how like it's kind of frowned upon to be a feminist. And we see that in a lot of different communities where it's kind of like, ooh, I don't know if I want to consider myself that, right? But by what they're doing in there is totally that. Like they're taking what is important to them, um, their identity, right? And they're not letting someone take that away. And so the tacos are like life, like they said, I think they even said, right? And they're not gonna let that be stripped away because they are in a different community or moved to a different geographic location. But they're not losing their culture by doing that. And the idea of that is like very, very much attached to, in my perspective, to like this idea of like a feminist perspective. Um, and so they give good examples of that, and that's even in a sense by them um dealing with that cultural clash, right? um and still being in those situations where they are oppressed, or they're viewed differently, um too, or even viewed still as outsiders even though they've lived there for a long time, so that's like another part of it that I think is pretty important, and shows that evidence and supports like the use of uh um Anzandua in here too, because like it's pretty embedded in here. um and one thing that I wanted to kind of like add on to that too was that like that idea of those spaces too, right? Like those in between spaces, even like we hear about in Anzaldúa, um, readings and stuff like that too, or analysis, um, that they always felt at home there, but it still wasn't really home like we hear about like in New Mexico or Mexico, like where they're from, right? But they've established it to be that because that's where they're at now. Um, so they're bringing, and I love it because they're like bringing the border to Kansas, and that's like really, really powerful and deep. And giving people a sense of that too, because you think about people from Kansas, they may not have that connection to that, but in this case, they can't help but have it. Why? Because like here it is, right? Like this is them. This is what it's like over there, and it's these people, right? And in this case, it's like been a positive thing for them, right? Um, what else? Okay, so my critiques on the conclusions and findings, like so the author kind of say, excuse me, um, that they find that it's kind of like an interesting thing because within those spaces, um, they can experience what Anzaldúa defines as crossroads or cultural collisions and borderlands, just by being in that area where there are cultural differences, because of isolation and the environments, where there are less Mexican American people or less people of color even, um, and so I think that's a big part of it. And then also, and that part's great. And I don't want to criticize that part too much, but I think there's also other elements there too, as far as this is concerned. Like there's a lot of stereotypical stuff that are embedded in here, obviously. Um, and like I hate to say that it's like stereotypical because like all of us, like all like Mexicanos, like we love tacos. Like that's it. Like we I can't deny that. I know there's probably like some of us that don't, and that's like kind of strange to me because they are kind of like the perfect food, but there are those kind of things in there. And so even that idea, to me, I think it would be cool if she even talked about that a little bit more, about how those ideas and those stereotypes, um how were they confronted, like how did they notice things that maybe were there um that weren't described, you know what I mean? So I think like that's a big part of it too. Like how much of that did they did how did that affect them even in school? Because like I think about like when you talk about the tias and the mom growing up and stuff like that too. Like I think about like my parents saying like when they went to school, the Anglo kids would give them grief about them eating tortillas, right? Or them having a bean burrito or whatever tacos. Like they would make fun of them, um and so and that was attached to those stereotypes and that deficit thinking, in regard to like people from the borderlands or people from Mexican American uh heritage, right? Or Hispanic heritage or Mexican American, however you want to refer to it. But that was one thing that I thought could have been added to it, because I think that would have added some more. But then also a little bit more perspective from the author too, like what was it, what was it like, um seeing that, and then like going, because I assume they went back and forth and seeing the difference between like the community that in which it originated to where they migrated to. Um so I think that would have been a cool element to add. Um but all in all, I thought it was a great article. I mean, it gave a lot of really cool narratives and cool insight, and it still had that sense of pride that I think a lot of us have whenever we are scholars and researchers, from these backgrounds. And it also it's wonderful because it gave an opportunity for her familia to share their story. And that's a huge thing. Like that's like not a critique for me at all. Like that's like a positive for sure. And so in the end, I thought it was really great article. I enjoyed reading it. Um, I plan on sharing it too, and I love um the narrators were just awesome. I really liked them a lot. But yeah, so that's where I stand on it. I thought it was a nice article, and it had some great insight, and I loved how much the author tied in so much of Anzaldúa, but also like I had like I things I questioned and wondered about. Well, thank you. I hope you have a nice rest of your week, and I look forward to hearing learning more from you. Thank you. Bye.